My name is Noelle. I'm a 40-year-old housewife. Today, I'd like to talk about my family. I have a husband who is the same age as me and a daughter who just turned 16 recently. I met my husband in college. We fell in love and got married. Nothing out of the ordinary. Unlike me, who has a rough personality, he is a very meticulous person. He had a peculiar obsession with how things were placed and was the kind of person who would not be satisfied until things were arranged to his liking. I felt some discomfort with him since we were dating. Yet, I had this feeling that marriage would change us for the better, but reality wasn't so sweet. After we got married, his meticulousness only increased. I had to adjust every aspect of my life to conform to his rules. No matter how tolerant I am, I can't accept all of his behaviors. Sometimes we would even end up in heated arguments. Every day passed in such a blur that there was not even a moment when I could rest. My daughter was born in the midst of such circumstances. My husband was delighted with our daughter, who came into our lives 2 years after our marriage. I thought this might bring some peace to our daily life. I was relieved, just by myself. However, my husband's attitude changed dramatically soon after. When a child is born, it's normal to adjust the rhythm of life to suit the child. Yet my husband didn't like that he couldn't keep his routine, and when our daughter squealed in the middle of the night, he would hurl strong words at her. Furthermore, he declared that he would not involve himself in child-rearing at all. I don't know how many times I have tried to divorce him because of his selfish attitude. Still, for the sake of our daughter, I gritted my teeth and endured. Every day, I fought desperately to protect my daughter, risking my own life. As if to mock my struggles, another tragedy was about to strike. And the cause was the very existence of the daughter I had fought so hard to protect. It's often said that children resemble their fathers, but I absolutely didn't want my precious daughter to resemble that man. Fortunately, her facial expressions were similar to mine. I thought everything would be okay. I believed so, but despite my wishes, as she grew up, her personality started to resemble my husband more and more. Around the age of 10, she started complaining about my cooking and became upset or threw tantrums when she didn't like the way things were placed or cleaned. Lately, with the onset of her rebellious phase, she even started to hurl harsh words at me. Of course, I didn't always let her have her way and often argued back. As if to break my heart, my husband sided with our daughter and started blaming me. When attacked by both of them, I couldn't fight back. Ultimately, my life became one where I was being constantly criticized, and then the day finally arrived. From the morning, I was feeling lethargic. I had a slight fever and was feeling dizzy. I was so unsteady that I couldn't walk straight in the house. I couldn't even stand and was stuck sitting on a chair. Despite seeing me in this state, neither my husband nor daughter said a single kind word. Instead, he barked at me. "Hey, where did you put my tie? The red one, the one I used 2 months ago." "Hey, did you wash my socks?" "Mom, where did you put them?" Thus, they were only thinking of themselves. It's just a tie, just socks. Why do they make such a big deal out of such trivial matters? Couldn't they pay attention to me just for today? Somehow in my hazy consciousness, I managed to see them off, and then I collapsed in the hallway. The next thing I saw was the familiar ceiling of the living room. I had been sleeping on the couch. It seems I had moved to the living room unconsciously. Although I was still feeling tired, thanks to a good rest, my condition had improved. I was awake, but there was a pleasant feeling as if part of my brain was still asleep. Being unwell was the cause, but I wonder when the last time I have slept so soundly. I gave up trying to escape from that comfort and went back to sleep. When I woke up next, it was already dark outside, And when I reflexively looked at the clock, it was past 5 in the evening. I felt the blood drain from my body all at once. I hadn't done most of the household chores, such as laundry and dinner preparation. I have to at least make dinner. I jumped up and headed to the kitchen. Since there was no time to go shopping, I managed to put together a menu using only leftovers. "I'm home." My daughter came home at the worst possible time while I was still scrambling. "Wait, you're still making dinner? That sucks." "I'm sorry, it'll be ready soon." Ignoring my apology, my daughter went into her room. Soon after, my husband came home from work. "What, you're still cooking dinner?" His words were filled with obvious discomfort. He has a meticulous routine after coming home, so he must have noticed something was different. After saying only that, my husband went into his room. He starts eating 15 minutes after he begins to change his clothes. That was also part of his routine. This means I only had 15 minutes left. I cooked desperately. Even if the cutting was rough, even if I messed up the seasoning, I couldn't stop cooking. If I didn't finish before my husband came out of his room, I wouldn't know what would happen. I managed to finish plating just before my husband came out of his room. I made it. I could feel the tension draining from my body. But then, what the hell? Who could eat this? That was my husband's outcry. "What's wrong?" "What's wrong, you say? You have some nerve asking that." My husband was inexplicably worked up. I didn't understand the cause of his anger. "This stir-fry, you overcooked it. The color is off, and the vegetables aren't even uniformly cut." "I'm sorry, I was a bit pressed for time today." "Time? You're not working. You have plenty of time." I couldn't forgive that single sentence. As if I wasn't doing anything at all. Why do I have to be spoken down to by a husband who doesn't even notice my discomfort? I have no time at all. Before I knew it, I was screaming with all my might. "Do you have any idea how much I struggle every day?" In a rush of emotion, I found myself screaming. It seemed to be an unexpected reaction for my husband. I saw him take a step back, his eyes filled with a frightened look. "What struggle? House chores can be done at your own pace, isn't it easy?" he challenged. "What do you know? It's not like I can just do them at my own pace," I countered. By then, I couldn't stop myself. "I was feeling really sick today, you know. I pushed through and made dinner, and you didn't even take a bite. How do you think that makes me feel?" I felt tears trickling down my cheeks. The emotions I had been holding back had finally exploded. Seeing my husband's face turn pale, I managed to calm down a bit. I was short of breath. My breathing was disrupted and I felt dizzy from all the shouting. But still, I waited for my husband's response. A simple apology, a single "I'm sorry" would have been enough. "Don't mess with me." That tiny spark of hope was extinguished by his trembling words. "Do you have any idea how much I struggle in the world to support our family? So you're saying I'm just living easy and free?" "I'm saying your job is to support me so I can focus on my work." "That's just an excuse. I'm not your slave." "Don't talk back to me." Just a little more and my husband would have raised his hand at me. I knew it instinctively, but I couldn't back down now. As I prepared to confront him with my next words, it happened. "What on earth are you doing?" Our daughter burst out of her room. "Your voices can be heard outside. Stop it. It's embarrassing." "Don't stop me. It's her talking nonsense that's the problem. It's you being selfish." "Just be quiet." My daughter's reprimand made us stop arguing. Then I explained to her what had happened. After hearing both me and my husband's sides, my daughter turned to me and said, "Honestly, Mom, you're the one who's wrong." Her words shocked me to the core. "Why?" Because housework is your job, isn't it? Dad can't afford to take time off work, even when he's not feeling well. That's right, you're too lenient on yourself. My husband's face as he spoke after my daughter filled me with resentment. Mom is always late with her chores. Even today, you haven't done the laundry yet. That's right, and you're not efficient. You can't even fold the laundry properly. Their words shattered my emotions into pieces. So you're both saying I'm not trying hard enough? Maybe you're not trying hard enough. I could probably do it better and faster. Yeah, you're too laid back. I bet we could manage without you, Mom. My daughter's words cut deeper than anything else. So was I the dispensable person? I thought we were a family, but could they dismiss me so easily? Having been confronted with this cruel reality, I found myself running out of the house. Before I knew it, I was in a pitch-dark park with no streetlights. My feet hurt. Sitting on a park bench, I realized that I had run out without even putting on my shoes. My tears had long since dried up, and my mind was blank. How long had I been sitting like this? Even if I stopped thinking, the harsh words would never disappear. My heart wouldn't heal. Recalling the words of my husband and daughter, I could feel my broken heart filling with resentment. I will never forgive them. They, my family who trampled on my feelings, must face punishment. My fighting spirit was quietly burning. The next morning, I flawlessly finished the cleaning and laundry. And for breakfast, I prepared a menu as extravagant as a dinner at a famous restaurant. By the time I finished preparations, my husband and daughter arrived in the living room almost simultaneously. Without making eye contact with me, they both took their seats. Come on, let's have breakfast. Upon my words, their faces seemed to stiffen even more. Mom, what's going on? Today's breakfast is really fancy. Instead of my frozen husband, my daughter asked me. Well, isn't it your 16th birthday today? Did you forget? Huh? Yeah, I did forget. You should at least remember your own birthday. Right, Dad? Huh? Yeah. After exchanging curt conversation, the two started breakfast with awkward movements. The dining table was not filled with cheerful conversations, and it was clear that both were fully observing my behavior. Was it because they were unaware that they had hurt someone, or just didn't want to admit it? It's understandable with my husband. After all, he's a stranger. But my daughter, she's the one I gave birth to and raised. I wished she would grow up to be a more considerate, kind person. It's not entirely wrong to say that daughters resemble their fathers, but she should have been able to understand with proper upbringing. I do have regrets, but it's a moot point now. Listen, just one word from me changed their expressions. What's going on? My husband's voice shook as he asked back. Starting today, I'm leaving this house. At that moment, they both paled simultaneously. Hold on, why? Why? You said you could do the housework better than me. I didn't say anything like that. Yes, you did. I'm sure you said it. I have never cut off my daughter's words so strongly until now. Whether she was shaken by my attitude or not, she didn't argue further. Next was my husband's turn. You also said it. You said I have more free time than you because I'm at home. I didn't mean it like that. Does such an excuse work in the real world? He didn't answer. Don't misunderstand. I'm moving to another house starting today, but it doesn't mean I won't come to this house. Stop. Today's my birthday, right? You're going to celebrate, right? My daughter pleaded with a face that seemed about to cry. I looked at her face and laughed. I'm sorry. I'm serious about this. As I watched my daughter crumble on the spot, I quietly stood up. Well, I'm off. I left the house to the sound of my husband and daughter's screams. That day, I booked a room in a hotel a short distance from the house. From there, I rented an apartment on a monthly basis and started buying the necessary items. Even while I was busy, my phone was flooded with messages from the two. Apology messages and calls from my daughter were coming in every 5 minutes. My husband, it seems, is still unable to admit his fault. I keep receiving messages from him saying things like, "What you did was outrageous." I've left all the messages from the two of them unread. It's really convenient these days being able to show my intentions without doing anything. 2 nights after leaving the house, I returned home once. As I opened the front door, my daughter came running up to me at an amazing speed. "Mom, you came back!" "I just came back to pick up something I forgot." I untangled myself from my daughter's arms, which were wrapped around me like a hug, and headed for the living room. Since I had only been gone for 2 days, there was no change in the living room as expected. However, the kitchen was piled high with convenience store lunchboxes, ramen cups, and bottles. Worse than that was the bathroom. Laundry had been left unwashed there. Both my husband and daughter often complain about the way I cook and fold the laundry. However, neither of them can do household chores like cooking and laundry at all. Of course, knowing that, I left home, so the current disaster is within my expectations. My husband was in the living room, but due to his pride, he turned his face away after just a glance at me. I pulled away from a sobbing daughter and left the house silently that day. 1 week later, when I returned home to check on them, the house was already filled with garbage. These two who never clean up or even take out the trash. Even so, the mess was far beyond my expectations. "Mom!" My daughter's face, which emerged as if pushing through the garbage, was horribly dirty and her hair was disheveled. She should be able to take a bath by herself, but it was clear that her life was falling apart at an unsustainable level. And at this point, my husband finally admitted his fault. "I was wrong. I'm really sorry." My husband kneeling on the garbage, rubbing his forehead against the garbage. Looking at him, I gently said, "Don't think you're going to be forgiven just by prostrating yourself." I felt a moment when the air froze for the first time. My husband's face, with his eyes wide open, was filled with despair. Next to me, my daughter was breaking down in tears. "If you really feel sorry, first clean up this house. If you can't do that, I'll divorce you." I get it, so please, forgive me." My husband jumped up and started to stir the trash around. He doesn't even know how to clean up in the first place, so it can't be helped. In the end, I proceeded with the cleaning while giving instructions to the two of them. It wasn't until 3 days later that everything was perfectly cleaned up. Now, shall we continue the birthday party? My husband and daughter lying in the living room, which is now cleaner than before. Looking down at the two of them, I deliberately said that cheerfully. From then on, all the housework was taken over by my husband. Even my daughter, who used to side with her father, is now on my side. Those days were very hard and painful, but now I realize that it was necessary.
You're not coming to our wedding. If you come, it will be the end of our relationship. My oldest son and future daughter-in-law agreed with a nod of their heads. My heart sank as I sensed how much they despised me. What exactly had I done to them? Wasn't I just acting like a normal mother to them? What was the matter with me? What made them despise me so much? They must really hate me, saying not to come to their wedding. But I can't come up with anything I did wrong. My husband too, of course. I'm unable to forgive my son. How could he act in this manner after I took such good care of him over the years? I can't believe he treats his mother this way. I need to make him understand that his demeanors are wrong. He will be punished if he disrespects his mother. Mary, a 55-year-old housewife, is my name. I have 2 sons. Our eldest son, David, now works for a company in Tokyo and is a fairly high-class elite man. Tom, our second son, on the other hand, has always been quiet and prefers tedious work, so he works at a manufacturing company in his hometown. When they were younger, the brothers were close, but as they grew, David began to dislike Tom. He would publicly humiliate Tom and openly harass him at school. Even after I scolded David, his attitude towards Tom did not change. Just recently, David has decided to get married. He will be married to a woman who works for the same company. She said that she would like to meet you guys, so I decided to plan a dinner. I was relieved to receive such a call because it meant I could finally send him off. David didn't want to be around Tom, and Tom himself said, "That would be better for me, too." And the day we promised to meet came. They had reserved a private room at a rather pricey restaurant. I was distracted by the unfamiliar place, but when I entered the room, David and a strong-looking woman were already seated. "Hey, Mom and Dad, you guys are late." "I'm sorry, we got lost as we have never been here before." "Don't embarrass me so much." My heart ached at his words, but David is always like that, so I decided not to worry. We took our seats and ate our delicious meal while listening to their conversation. "She pays attention to everything I say. She thinks a lot about our future together. She's a wonderful person. If I had someone like her by my side much earlier, I would have succeeded in much more things. She is a perfectionist who excels at everything she does. She is so different from you guys, Mom and Dad." David was happily talking about his fiancée. Cheerfully, she was telling him to stop. David appeared to be obsessed with her, and when he speaks, all he can do is praise her or himself. When I asked him about how they met, he said, "You should know how good she is instead of such a boring story like that." Even though we had only met, I felt like he was trying to make her look good to us as much as possible, which made me very uncomfortable. My husband was also uneasy, and I was relieved that I had not brought Tom with us. "I can say this again and again, but she is different from you guys. Please don't be mean to her after we get married. Give her some respect." "I don't need you to tell me that, because I wouldn't do that." "Ha, let's see. You guys have prioritized Tom over me my whole life. With that in mind, I can't trust that you guys wouldn't do anything to her." David's words stopped me in my tracks. He is saying whatever he wants, and we were worried about Tom because David harassed him so much. Tom has been troubled by David's harassment since he was a child, and it is natural for a person to try to alleviate their child's stress. When I asked David why, he simply stated, "Because I didn't like Tom." So I couldn't ever solve the problem. I didn't know David would take that situation as us loving Tom more than him. However, I did not want to make a scene, so I couldn't object to David's words. The tense dinner concluded without incident, but I knew that all the issues hadn't been resolved. "Aren't you guys getting old? Don't worry, we'll take care of you too." David had made the decision on his own that he would live with us after their marriage. He appeared to have obtained the consent from his fiancée. She was saying, "You have another son who will not be dependent forever, don't you? I must take care of him." I felt really uneasy about that. Tom does live with us, but he does so because he actively cares for us, not because he is spoiled by us. David and his family, on the other hand, moved into our house without our permission, took over our room, and began acting as if they were the owners. "Why don't you go weed the garden, Tom?" "Sorry, but I have to leave for work." "You don't have a job. Go ahead and do it yourself." "What? You're so arrogant." David's persistent nudging of Tom has gotten stronger. I was amused to see Tom approach the situation with more maturity. But things were not that simple. David and his family were attempting to force Tom and us out of the house without telling us. It was late at night after my husband and Tom had both gone to bed. I was thirsty and went to get some water. The living room light was turned on. "Hey, when will this house be ours?" "Just a little more time. We need concrete plans so there is no interruptions." "I want to renovate the house after we get rid of the others. This house looks old." David chuckles at her words. I agree. "I can't believe it. I can't believe they are thinking about doing this. I told my husband and Tom right away. It would be a disaster if we did not act immediately." Tom spoke up while my husband and I were unsure what to do. "Mom, I'll take care of it. I have a strategy." Tom's words were comforting, but the plan he had given me demanded patience more than anything else. However, if Tom's way works, David and his fiancée will be out of here for good. That is why my husband and I agreed to follow Tom's plan. There were many issues, but life went on as usual, and David and his fiancée's wedding date was set. They decided to have their wedding at a very nice nearby wedding hall. We thought having it here in the countryside would not be so great, but the location we saw was quite nice. It's a little pricey, but with the money we're making, it's doable. I was annoyed to see David smile at me, but I kept my mouth shut. David continued to poke at Tom, but thanks to Tom's mature demeanor, it didn't appear to be too painful. The couple waved me over when the wedding date was set. When I went to see them with my husband and Tom, we were told something outrageous. "Please, don't come to our wedding. Our relationship will end if you come." The words astounded me. I eventually regained my composure and asked David, "Are you sure? Why so suddenly?" "I'm terrified of you guys. I don't want these people at my wedding." It was impossible not to feel angry when she fake cried in response to my question. "I'm telling you again, if you come, our relationship is done. Isn't that how you want it anyways? Aren't I your horrible son? Unlike my younger brother who can't do anything wrong." David pointed at Tom. Tom appeared to be at loss for words. I finally lost patience when I heard him saying that. "That's it, David. You've been bullying Tom all this time. Why are you acting this way? You guys are siblings. Stop treating him that way." David and his wife turned their attention to me as I said this. "You can't say anything about me. You were deceived by Tom's fake acts and spoiled him. You have always treated me so differently. That's because you bully your little brother. Isn't that just an excuse? You couldn't help yourself because Tom was so cute." "That is not true." David refused to speak to me, despite my repeated assurances that I did not favor Tom. Why is he not listening to me? First and foremost, it became like this because of his own actions. Why doesn't he try to think about any of it? David is my son, even if he's a jerk. I felt obligated to look after him. However, this is no longer the case. I made the decision to abandon my son at this point. "Okay, then I'm not going to the wedding." I stated that I was no longer concerned. Tom and my husband both gave me wide eyes, but David and the others seemed content. "But you are certain about this? You will be sorry." "No, we will not be sorry. The best weddings are those with no distractions." They were cheering. Our hearts, on the other hand, were sad. We didn't need to go to a wedding when we weren't invited. Finally, our family decided not to attend the wedding. We weren't even given an invitation, so even if we went, we probably couldn't go in anyways. David seemed content the entire time, but they had no idea what this would entail. It was amusing to think about the strategy Tom had come up with. The new married couple got through the wedding without incident, but they still stayed at our house. They recently changed jobs to be closer to the house, so they were busy packing some things and moving to the new office. They returned home from work on the first day after transferring offices. When they came home, they called Tom in a panic. "Tom, what's going on?" They questioned Tom. When I asked them what had happened, they told me briefly. On their first day at work, as they were being shown around the company, they saw Tom, who was not supposed to be there. When the boss, who was showing them around, and spotted Tom, he bowed and said, "Thank you for all your help." He told them that Tom was the president of one of the company's clients. The couple, who had thought Tom was just a factory worker, could not hide their surprise at his words. In fact, Tom had been working diligently at the factory since he started working there. His hard work had been recognized by the president who ran the factory. Tom's unique ideas were indispensable for running the factory, and Tom had been admired by those around him ever since he started working there. Thanks to him, the factory began to improve its performance. Before long, it had become a factory that many companies were relying on. But then the president fell ill. Tom was worried about the president and always went to visit him on his days off. Seeing Tom's dedication to the factory and to others, the president appointed him as the next president. Tom was humbled at the time, saying, "I can't do that." But the president's determination was not easily swayed. With the support and encouragement of those around him, Tom successfully rose to the position of president. The factory's performance grew even more after that. Tom had always been well-liked, was highly trusted by his employees, and it seemed that he had good sense as a president. The factory has now grown into one that is relied upon by companies all over Japan. Tom's face is known even by large companies in Tokyo. Today, Tom was visiting the company to have a discussion with the client. That was all. However, the couple who did not think Tom was in such a good position were not happy that he was treated in such a way. "Of course, you cheated. You've always been like that." David grabbed Tom. "If you had told us, we wouldn't have behaved like that. Why didn't you tell us?" David's wife broke down in tears on the spot. What an ironic situation. "I made it to the top by my abilities, that's all. So why are you so angry?" Tom said this with a nonchalant expression on his face. David's anger seemed to be aroused by this expression, and he began to yell at him. "Don't act like that to me!" But Tom spoke calmly to David. "I want you to listen to something else. I think it's the most important thing for you." Somehow we were able to quiet David and his wife, and got them to sit down. Tom, who had gone to his room to get something, came back and began to tell us the story. "First of all, look at this." Tom then laid out several photographs on the table. In them were David's wife and a man dressed in a fancy outfit. To put it bluntly, they were pictures of the scene of David's wife having a love affair. David looked at it and started shouting, "This is fake!" David's wife was trembling as if she did not know what to do. She's going to be my sister-in-law, so I did some research beforehand. Then I found all this evidence. With this much evidence, there's no way you can get away with it, right?" Hearing Tom's words, David's wife put her head down. "I'm sorry." David, who could not believe the situation, was simply stunned. This is what happens when you don't focus on the inside of a person. No one can be perfect. Tom laughed, and we couldn't help but giggle. David fell to his knees in despair. The only sound in the room was David's wife apologizing to him earnestly. In the end, David and his wife got divorced. David isn't kind enough to forgive cheating. His wife was in panic when she was asked to pay alimony, but she was able to manage it with her parents' money. However, this was not enough to heal David's wounds. David quit his job due to the shock of the divorce. Since then, David has been shutting himself away in his room, and the only time we see him is when he comes out to get his meals. However, when Tom was there, he would screech a little and run away. It seems that since that time, he is scared of Tom. The family had discussed many times what to do with David. In the end, everyone agreed to end relationship with David in the near future. I am sure that would be a terrible thing for us to do to David. However, we were not kind enough to forgive him for the selfishness he has shown us. A few months later, David was kicked out from the house. Toward the end, he cried out to forgive him. But to be honest, I no longer recognized him as family, so I think this was a natural consequence. The three of us, on the other hand, are now living a carefree life with no one in our way. My husband has retired, but we are still able to live without any financial difficulties thanks to Tom's work. At least until the end of my life, I would like to make sure Tom has a good family. Tom is getting married soon. His fiancée is an employee of the same company, and they have been dating for several years. I am looking forward to the wedding of my precious son.
My name is Mrs. Natalie Watson, and I'm 29 years old. I live in a small apartment with my husband. We've been married for 3 years and generally get along well. I say generally because I've become unhappy with my husband over the past few years. To be more precise, it's not just my husband, but also his parents. My husband and his parents have a great relationship, and we visit their house about once a week. At first, when I was taken to my in-laws' house, I thought, he's such a filial person. However, every time I went to their house, my in-laws repeatedly said, "Natalie, when will you quit your job? A woman's job is to take care of the home." Gradually, I started to dislike going to their house. I enjoy my current job and want to keep working as long as I can. I told my husband this before we got married. Even when his parents blame me, my husband doesn't even make eye contact, acting as if it doesn't concern him. I started to dread going to my in-laws' house, and there are times when I told my husband, "Why don't you just go by yourself?" However, my husband would say, "My parents want to see you too," and force me to go with him. Eventually, I gave up trying to convince him otherwise. However, I couldn't bring myself to say this to his parents, as it might hurt my husband's feelings. But I couldn't bring myself to tell his parents that, as it might hurt my husband's feelings. In the end, all I could do was smile and brush off their comments each time. While I disliked my husband's indifferent attitude, what I hated most was being asked by his parents, "When will you have a child?" I, myself, like kids and thought it would be nice to have one. However, you can't force a child to be born, and it's not something that can be easily done just by wanting it. First of all, I couldn't understand the idea of having a child just for his parents' sake. Honestly, I wanted them to leave me alone. I talked to my husband about this issue as well, but he just said, "Don't worry about it, they're just concerned," and didn't do anything. As my frustration built up due to my husband's attitude, and the fact that I had to endure this situation alone, my mother-in-law said something I couldn't bear. She asked, "Are you infertile since you still haven't had a child?" On top of that, my father-in-law looked at me as if I were a criminal, saying, "Did you keep your infertility a secret and marry our son?" I couldn't stand it anymore. Until now, I had endured and overcome anything they had said with a smile. But I stopped smiling and said to them, "I'll undergo infertility treatment. In return, can you promise not to bring this up again?" I was surprised by my own words, but I realized how stressed I had been. Suddenly, my previously silent husband spoke up. "I don't think we need fertility treatments. We're still young. There's no need to force ourselves to have a child. Fertility treatments cost money, and I want to cherish our time as a couple," he said firmly to his parents. At that time, I interpreted my husband's words to suit my convenience, and believed that he was thinking of me when he said that. On a certain weekday, I took paid leave and headed to the gynecologist. The concern of being nagged by his parents about having a child had decreased, but I wanted to be sure if I was really infertile. At first, I thought of asking my husband, but he became moody whenever I tried to talk about infertility treatments, so I decided to take the exam by myself. The examination finished quicker than I thought, and I scheduled an appointment for the results a week later. On my way out, I happened to meet eyes with a pregnant woman in the waiting room. I recognized her face and stopped in my tracks. She seemed to notice me right away and approached me. "Are you, by any chance, Natalie? Could it be Claire?" When we called each other's names, she nodded, confirming that she was indeed my classmate from elementary and middle school. Claire's belly was quite big, and she was 9 months pregnant. She had just finished her regular checkup, so I decided to visit her house while walking her home. Claire's house was close to mine, and I was surprised by that, but I was even more surprised to learn that her husband and my husband worked at the same company. Catching up on our current lives and chatting about our school days, my eyes were naturally drawn to Claire's belly. Noticing my stare, she asked, "Do you want to touch it? Is it okay?" I asked back, and she replied, "Of course." I gently touched Claire's belly. In my memory, Claire had a great figure with a slim waist, but now her body had grown so much. I was filled with amazement and the wonder that there really was a baby inside her. After keeping my hand on her belly for a while, I felt a faint movement when I tried to pull away. Surprised, I looked up at Claire. "Did it just—" "Yeah, it started moving recently." "That's amazing." "Yeah." Claire, who happily stroked her belly, already had the face of a mother. Before I knew it, I found myself saying, "I'm envious." I made a face as if I'd said something I shouldn't have, and quickly looked away from Claire. Claire, sensitive to people's emotions, seemed to have noticed enough and asked, "If I'm misunderstanding, I apologize, but did something happen?" I hesitated to talk about it, but I thought I couldn't deceive Claire's eyes, so I told her about the situation with my in-laws and children. Once I started talking, I couldn't stop, and I ended up telling her everything, including the fertility test I had taken at the clinic today. I thought maybe I'd said too much, but a strange sense of trust prevailed, making me believe it was okay to talk to Claire about it. Above all, I think I wanted someone to hear my pent-up frustrations from the past few years. While I talked, Claire just nodded and listened quietly. After I finished talking, Claire said, "You've been holding back for so long. You endured it well. If it were me, I couldn't have held back and would have cut ties with my in-laws." "Yeah, I just realized it now, but it seems I've been under a lot of stress. I feel a bit relieved after talking to you, Claire." at least my husband stood by my side, which was a small consolation. I said that with a light laugh, but Claire's expression remained tense. I was perplexed because I didn't know why Claire was making such a face, so I called her name. Then, she hesitated for a moment before reluctantly opening her mouth to speak. "It's about your husband. Anyway, it might be better not to tell him about the test for now," Claire said with hesitation. "Huh?" I blinked at Claire's unexpected words. Curious about why Claire said those words, I asked her directly. Then, Claire started to tell me something astonishing. I couldn't digest what she said, and I somehow made it home with unsteady steps. Ever since I got home, I had been sitting on the sofa, pondering over what Claire had told me. I didn't want to believe it, but I also couldn't imagine Claire lying about something like that. Moreover, I had been feeling doubtful about my husband's behavior. If what Claire said was true, I couldn't forgive him. I made up my mind and decided to find out the truth. My husband and I were visiting my in-laws after a long time. As my husband and in-laws were eating tea and snacks, my mother-in-law suddenly asked, "So, when will you quit your job, Natalie?" Until now, I would have replied, "I don't have plans to quit yet," but this time was different. "I suppose I'll quit when we have a child," I replied. Hearing that, my mother-in-law blinked and said, "Well, you finally decided to have a child." My father-in-law also excitedly said, "Ooh, will I finally get to hold a grandchild?" But my husband, after glancing at my face for a moment, made a "don't say unnecessary things" expression and said, "Well, having a child is a blessing, so we don't know if it'll happen right away." As expected, my husband reacted the way I thought he would. I glanced at him and said, "Actually, I went to the gynecologist the other day and showed him the results of my infertility test. It stated that there were no issues. I spoke to my husband before he could say anything. I'm starting to want a child, too. You'll cooperate for the sake of your parents, right?" My husband looked back and forth between the test results and my face, then turned bright red and yelled, "I'm not taking any infertility treatments. I won't get tested either." His parents were shocked by his sudden change, but I understood that what Claire had said was true and felt disappointed. "Hey, do you know Mr. Howard?" When I asked, my husband looked surprised, wondering how I knew. I decided to tell him without waiting for his response. "His wife is my friend. Apparently, you've been saying things at work like, 'My wife is a defective product who can't have children due to infertility. She's abandoned being a woman and only focuses on work. And I'm so pitiful to have married such a wife.'" As I looked at him with a cold gaze I had never directed at him before, his mouth trembled and he became defensive. "So what if it's true? Who else would want someone like you?" Watching my furious husband, I felt my feelings for him cooling down. Rather, I started to wonder what I ever saw in a man like this. Calmly, I pointed at the test results on the table and said, "I just proved there's no problem with me, right?" While my husband stayed silent, I brought up something that had been bothering me in the back of my mind. "Could it be that you're the one with issues? Is that why you've been stubbornly refusing infertility treatments and testing?" That's when my mother-in-law, who had been silent, chimed in. "There's no way that's true. There's no way there's a problem with my son. If there's a problem, it's with you." With her face turning red, she grabbed the test results on the table and said, "These must be fake," and tore them up. My husband looked surprised at his mother's actions, but then he agreed. "Yeah, that's right. There's no way I have a problem." He and his parents started to blame me. Realizing there was no point in continuing the conversation, I slammed the prepared divorce papers on the table. "Then please divorce me. And why don't you find a much better wife than someone like me?" With that, my husband said, "Yeah, that's right. I'll find a much better wife than you," and angrily filled out the divorce papers. his parents didn't try to stop him. As I emotionlessly watched the divorce papers being filled out, I felt a sense of joy at severing ties with the 3 people in front of me. Once he finished, I quickly snatched the papers, said, "Well then, goodbye," and hurried out of my in-laws' house. I thought I heard a voice behind me, but it must have been my imagination. I headed straight to the city hall and quickly submitted the divorce papers. A few days later, I quickly moved out of the apartment we had been living in together and moved into my company dormitory. Since I was the only one who had signed the lease for the apartment and had already prepared for this day, the move went smoothly. By the way, I packed my husband's belongings in cardboard boxes and sent them to his parents' house with cash on delivery. When I started getting used to life in the company dormitory, I got a call from my ex-husband. Wondering what he wanted now, I answered the phone only to be yelled at right away. "Why did you submit the divorce papers? Why did you move out of the apartment?" I really want to ask why he was bringing this up now. I explained calmly, "Don't say things that don't make sense. You agreed and filled out the divorce papers, right? And as for the apartment, I was the one who originally signed the lease. And since we're divorced, I moved out because it's no longer necessary." However, my ex-husband didn't listen to me. "Take back the divorce. No, let's go submit new marriage papers. Where are you living now? Let's live together again." He continued to say even more disjointed things. I couldn't take it anymore, so I said, "Okay, I'm hanging up now. Don't ever call me again." I tried to end the call, but my ex-husband threatened, "If you don't tell me where you're living, I'll go to your company." I was fed up and just told him, "You're the one who'll be in trouble if you cause any problems," and hung up on the phone. Nevertheless, I couldn't be sure that he wouldn't come to the company, so I talked to my boss about my ex-husband just in case. Neither my boss nor I thought he would actually do anything, but he ended up causing a scene. I learned from the security guard that he went wild in the company lobby, and the police had to be called in the end. I was full of shame and guilt, but my coworker sympathized with me and told me that breaking up with him was the right decision. Later, I heard from Claire's husband that my ex-husband had panicked when the police incident became known to his company and tried to make me the villain. However, Claire's husband corrected the story, and the lies my ex-husband had been telling about me were exposed. It seems he found it difficult to stay at the company and quit. Most likely, my jobless ex-husband is now back at his parents' house, crying to them. Honestly, even though it might be a case of you reap what you sow, I think it would be tough to support a son who has become unemployed and divorced. Well, it doesn't really matter to me anymore, since he is a stranger now. Since then, I've been free from unnecessary stress and spending my days focused on work. I have more time and money to spend freely, so I occasionally visit Claire to check on her, and we make plans to spoil her baby. She sometimes finds this amusing and shakes her head at me. As for getting remarried myself, I don't have the luxury to think about it just yet, but I do hope that someday I can have a happy family of my own.
Get off quickly, you fool. Having regained my memory, I vowed to abandon the husband and in-laws who had subjected me to this. Where am I? My name is Meg, and I'm 28 years old. When I woke up, I found myself lying in a hospital bed. As I was confused why I was there, I heard footsteps, and a man rushed into the room. He approached me with an angry look on his face, but I didn't recognize him at all. I don't know this person. Excuse me, but who are you? Meg, are you kidding me? If you're awake, you must be fine, so leave the hospital right away. Being hospitalized is such an overreaction. You're dragging me into this mess. He yelled at me like that. How rude of him to shout at me upon our first meeting. Hearing his raised voice, a nurse and a security guard came running and took the man away. As I was still frozen in shock, my mother, Mary, entered the room, with her eyes filled with tears. Meg, you're awake. I'm so glad. We were so worried about you. But I had no idea what she was talking about. My poker-faced brother Jake was also crying for some reason. My father Ken was also teary, stood behind them. According to them, I was found collapsed in front of my house. I had suffered a concussion from the fall and had sustained a large cut on my head that required multiple stitches, but I didn't remember any of it. Since I bled a lot from my head, a neighbor had called an ambulance. That's what my mother told me. Mom, who was that aggressive man who came in earlier? An aggressive man? Now it was my family's turn to be puzzled. After speaking with the nurse and security guard who had taken the man away, we found out that the aggressive man was supposedly my husband. Wait. I'm married? I have absolutely no memory of that. Meg, are you serious? My brother looked at me with a worried expression. Why did I collapse in front of that house? That guy earlier was yelling at me to leave the hospital right away. Do you have amnesia? My mother muttered, then hurried to press the nurse call button. After she explained the situation to the nurse, I was subjected to a series of medical tests. There were too many tests to be completed in one day, and since the test results wouldn't be available immediately, many people came to visit me while I waited. My coworkers brought me my favorite snacks, flowers, fruit, and other get-well gifts, and some even brought me personal gifts. My friends also came to see me one after another, worried about me. But in the midst of all of this, how long are you going to stay in the hospital? Do you know how much money this is costing? Who do you think is paying for this? Leave the hospital as soon as possible. What a lazy wife you are. Get back to work quickly. We're short-staffed because of you. Among the many visitors, the people who said these unbelievable things were my husband Kevin and his parents. When my father happened to witness their behavior, he was initially taken aback by the sight of them that he had never seen before. My daughter has been seriously injured. She's in the hospital because she needs to be. You heartless people shouldn't be saying such things to her. But he soon retorted in a voice I couldn't have imagined from his usually mild-mannered demeanor. Please leave immediately. My brother and mother sided with my father. Please don't come here anymore. That day, I left hurriedly due to my family's fierce stance, but my husband and in-laws still came persistently, complaining and shouting about when I would be discharged and how much trouble I was causing. Eventually, I was moved to a private room, and they were denied visitation. The hospital let me stay in the private room for the same price as a shared room, so I was lucky. The test results showed that I had completely lost a portion of my memory. It felt strange that something like this could happen in reality. The doctor initially suspected a traumatic injury, but since I didn't have any bleeding in my brain despite hitting my head on the concrete road, it seemed that it wasn't traumatic. I was diagnosed with a psychological condition triggered by hitting my head. I really don't understand anything. I can't even remember my husband's face, and I can't believe I was married to him. Apparently, I was married and living with my in-laws. My husband, Kevin, is 35 years old. He was working at my in-laws' store. I was working as a secretary at another company, so we were both working. However, my actions were monitored by Kevin and my in-laws. They took my salary, and it didn't seem like a happy married life. They checked my work schedule, and on my days off, I was helping at the store, ran by my in-laws, without pay. When my salary was deposited, almost all of it was withdrawn, leaving me with no money to use, and I was responsible for all of the household chores as a wife. Despite working the same condition, Kevin would say, "Why do I have to do the housework? Isn't that a woman's job? Don't push your work onto me." He didn't do anything around the house. Moreover, he would blame me for every failure and hurl verbal abuse, like useless and slow-witted, at me. I was also constantly nagged by my in-laws about housework, work, and not being able to conceive a child. I couldn't even get a proper mealtime in this house. Of course, with such a life, it seemed that my exhaustion was accumulating. Kevin used to drive me to and from work, but it wasn't out of love. It was to monitor me, so I wouldn't waste money or take detours. My coworker and friend Betty told me about my married life. I had apparently talked to Betty about my troubles with my marriage to Kevin and living with my in-laws. As I listened to Betty's story, I gradually began to remember the day I got injured. That day, as usual, my husband was yelling at me in the car on our way home from an outing. "You took so long for shopping, and now we're going to be late for our appointment. What are you going to do about it, you slowpoke?" It wasn't my shopping. I was looking for something your mom asked for. If you had helped me to look, we would have finished sooner. Don't make excuses. It's something you were asked to get. Every time I go out with you, I end up in a bad mood. I should have never come along. My husband didn't stop yelling at me for nearly an hour, and when we got home and I tried to get out of the car, my still angry husband said, "Hurry up and get out, you idiot!" And with that, he pushed me out of the driver's seat. I then fell out of the car, hitting my head on the concrete ground. Despite this, my husband didn't stop. He just drove off somewhere. A neighbor saw me lying there, motionless and bleeding from my head, and called an ambulance for me. Since I remembered this, I called the police and told them about the incident. The investigation proceeded. A nearby security camera footage confirmed that my memory was true. When I heard this, my body shook with anger. Why did I have to endure such treatment? I swore in my heart that I would make him pay the appropriate price. Although the fact that I was married to Kevin still feels vague and like someone else's business, my strong fatigue, my emaciated body, and the blood test results all show that my condition was terrible. It must have been the married life Betty told me about. Of course, after being discharged from the hospital, I didn't go back to the house with Kevin and his in-laws, but returned to my parents' home. At my parents' home, I was treated like a princess. "Meg, today we made your favorite, fried chicken. Eat as much as you like. Today, your dad bought a cake. Let's all eat it together later." In this way, my mother prepared delicious meals every day, and my father and brother took great care of me. Thanks to my mother's delicious cooking, my body gradually recovered, day by day. My workplace was understanding, and they told me to take a leave of absence and return to work after fully resting. Because of my life at parents' home, not only did my accident injuries heal, but my body's fatigue also improved, and my hair and skin, which had been in terrible condition right after being admitted to the hospital, became beautiful again. It became clear how much stress I had been under in my married life. Suddenly, anxiety crossed my mind. Does being married mean I have to go back to that house? Such anxiety unconsciously slipped out of my mouth. Don't worry about that. Nobody would force our precious daughter to return to a house that pushed her this far. You should divorce him and cut ties as soon as possible. My mother said so, and after discussing it with my family, they decided to ask a lawyer who was a friend of my father. This lawyer knows me since I was a child and had a long relationship with my father. After hearing my situation, the lawyer, like my family, angrily agreed to help. Thanks to the skilled lawyer, the process of divorce started smoothly. Meanwhile, at the house where Kevin and his in-laws lived, Kevin and his parents were fuming. "When is she coming back? The housework and the store can't run smoothly without her. We need her back as soon as possible." When Kevin said that, his mother-in-law also said, "She's already been discharged from the hospital, right? Why isn't she coming back here? Instead of resting, she should give birth to at least one heir." My father-in-law expressed his indignation as well. "She's such a spoiled wife. When she comes back, we need to straighten her out." In fact, they called my parents home almost every day. "Meg is there, right? Why isn't she coming back here? Her body has recovered, hasn't it? We have a business here, so please let her return as soon as possible." My brother, who had answered the phone, told me what they had said. My family unanimously said that I didn't need to go back, but I wanted to go and get my belongings. I consulted with a lawyer, and my father decided to accompany me. From that day on, my husband's family was in deep trouble. As soon as I entered the house, "How long are you going to stay at your parents' house? What have you been doing without answering the phone? You're such an irresponsible wife. Hurry up and get back to work." There's a mountain of housework and work waiting for you. Kevin and my in-laws started blaming me. As the lawyer and my father entered the room, they were momentarily surprised and closed their mouths. Why didn't you come back alone? Why did you bring a lawyer? What do they have to do with this? But then started scolding me again. Let's sit down and talk for a moment. The lawyer calmed them down and led them to the living room with my father. I went upstairs to my room to pack my stuff. Why did I need to come back to this house? I remembered that I left important evidence of the emotional abuse here. I had kept a diary where I recorded Kevin and my in-laws' words and actions along with the dates. The lawyer told me that it was very important as evidence, and I also had another piece of evidence that I had always hidden from my in-laws. As I was packing, "What's that? Who agreed to the divorce? Don't make decisions on your own." I heard a loud bang on the desk. My body reflexively tensed up, and I crouched down. It seemed that my father and the lawyer had been discussing the divorce. I quickly grabbed my packed belongings and rushed downstairs. Just then, Kevin came out of the entrance and said, "What's with the luggage? Aren't you coming back? Are you the one saying you want a divorce? Explain yourself properly." As he tried to grab me, the lawyer intervened just in time. "Violence is not acceptable." "I'm not being violent. I just want to talk to her." "Hey, you need to talk first." As he tried to approach me again, the doorbell rang with a ding-dong. "Yes? Who is it?" My mother-in-law answered the intercom. "We are the police. Is Kevin Davis at home?" Kevin Davis is my husband's full name. "What business do the police have here?" My mother-in-law's voice trembled. "Could you please open the door if Mr. Davis is present?" the police continued. My mother-in-law hurriedly approached and opened the door. "Excuse us, which one of you is Kevin Davis?" "That's me," my husband replied. "Kevin Davis, you are under arrest for suspicion of assault. Please accompany us to the station." As the police officer announced this, "Huh?" I could hear my mother-in-law gasping for breath. My husband was also clearly shaken, asking, "Why me?" He's apparently perplexed. Yes, after officially filing a complaint with the police about the recent accident, it became a criminal case. Fortunately, security camera footage was available, leaving no room for excuses. At first, he was quietly taken away. "I'm not in the wrong. It's her fault for being clumsy. It's just an exaggeration because I pushed her a little. I'm not in the wrong. Meg, are you listening? Hey, hurry up and withdraw the complaint." He gradually began to shout. As he yelled loudly, neighbors began to gather. At the entrance, "Kevin, why? How come, Kevin?" my mother-in-law cried out. My father-in-law seemed completely dumbfounded. Ignoring my in-laws, my father, the lawyer, and I left the house. Since then, we sent a certified letter demanding a divorce to my in-laws and my husband, citing the incident and the ongoing emotional abuse. The emotional abuse was meticulously documented in the diary I had retrieved from the house. And that day, when Kevin slammed his head on the table and raised his voice, my memory had fully returned. The situation during the emotional abuse had come flooding back, all at once. The voice notes on my smartphone also had careful records of the verbal abuse, and there were a staggering number of them. Nearly 100 records had been left in about a year. There were not only records of verbal abuse from my husband, but also from my in-laws. The triggers were really trivial things, like dinner being a little late or the bath not being prepared. There were recordings of being harshly scolded for such things. "Meg, it's already 7 p.m. and you haven't prepared dinner yet? Why can't you do something as simple as that? Stir fry again? You can't even consider our health. You're really a failure as a wife. What are you trying to sit down for? You don't have time to sit and eat with us. You still have work to close up the store. You're really useless." Such voices from my mother-in-law, and, "What? The bath isn't ready yet? I told you I wanted to get in right after dinner, didn't I? What have you been doing? You're messing up my schedules. You're really slow at everything. Can't you do anything right without being told?" Voices like that from my husband were recorded many times. There were all sorts of verbal abuse, such as being called a failure, useless, a slacker, and slow-witted. Just listening to it for a bit made my body shrink. The diary and voice recorder were solid evidence, so there's no way to deny it. I was able to get a smooth divorce since I had all the evidence. Along with the certified letter, I sent my in-laws a piece of evidence I had brought from the house. It was Kevin's test results. I was often blamed by my in-laws for not being able to have a child, but the cause was Kevin's azoospermia. I kept quiet not to crush Kevin's ego, but it doesn't matter now that we're divorcing. They must have been looking forward to an heir, but they probably couldn't have imagined that their son was the cause of infertility. Kevin was then prosecuted, but even in court, "It's her fault! Bring her here! I did nothing wrong!" showed no remorse, yelling. Because of this behavior, the judge's impression of him was poor, and he was sentenced to prison without probation. Not only that, but I also decided to sue my husband for emotional abuse and psychological DV in civil court. I'll make sure to get compensation and cut ties with that man completely. There's no affection left for my husband now that my memory has returned, and I feel relieved to be getting away from him. I can rest easy knowing that I won't have to see him while he's in prison. As for my in-laws, I negotiated using the evidence of emotional abuse and received compensation. At first they argued, "Why should we pay? We have nothing to do with this. If anything, we were teaching her how to be a proper wife, and she should be grateful." But when they found out there was evidence, they probably didn't want their business to be affected, so they paid more compensation than the going rate. However, my in-laws' fears became a reality. It was only natural that their son, who worked with them, got arrested. Rumors spread, such as, "Did you hear? The son of that store pushed his wife out of the car and seriously injured her." They were always bullying their daughter-in-law. Even though she worked outside of the house, the daughter-in-law was forced to work for free at their store. Because of these rumors, the store was far from being able to continue its business. Customers gradually stopped coming, and it seems that the store went out of business just 6 months after Kevin's arrest. They had taken out a loan using their land as collateral, so they lost both their land and savings and ended up filing for bankruptcy. Now, they are living modestly in an old apartment, receiving welfare. I wonder if the three of them will live together once Kevin is released. It's none of my business anymore. "Meg, would you like to go out for dinner tonight?" My boss and current boyfriend Ronald cheerfully asks me after work. "Stop it, everyone's still here." "Oh, you two are always so lovey-dovey, I can't even watch." We don't care the teasing from our colleagues. "I made a reservation, so let's get going." He pretends not to hear me. A few years after my husband's arrest and since his release, he has been supporting me, always listening to my troubles as I was being harassed by my ex. Eventually, he gave me rides to and from work. One day, my ex approached me suddenly, saying, "Meg, I have something to talk about. Let's live together again. I've changed my ways, so I'm sure we can make it work." Ronald stepped between us and said, "Stop bothering her." My ex fought back, saying, "This has nothing to do with you. It's between me and Meg. Stay out of it." Ronald replied, "Meg is important to me. You need to give up on her already. I'll call the police. I won't hold back if I see you again." Thankfully, I haven't seen my ex since then. Ronald used to play sports, so he has a good physique and a strong face, which was probably very effective against my not-so-large ex. He's also a sweets lover, which is a cute contrast to his tough appearance. He's a wonderful person who always respects my opinions.